55, 56, and 57. Tri-Five Chevys. If there ever were a trio of cars that embodies everything that is right about the 1950s in America, it's the Tri-Five Chevys. Why were and are these cars so popular? What's their appeal that they became such a cultural cornerstone? Well, that's what we're going to find out in the 87th episode of the Automotive History series, which is a tribute to the Tri-Five Chevys. In the mid-50s, the personality of GM's 5 divisions is based on price and not much else. It was all part of GM's carefully curated price ladder. If you wanted cheap transportation, you bought a Chevy. If you had middle-class income, you went for a Pontiac, Oldsmobile, or Buick. And if you really wanted to express your wealth and status, you went straight to Cadillac. So Chevrolet was stuck with the average man's everyday low-cost price image. Perfectly fine, and the cars were stylish, but nothing exciting. I always like to say that if you want to know what the average American car from a certain year looks like, take a good look at the Chevrolets of that year, as they capture the generic styling trends quite well. This is not an insult, but a compliment. By 1954, however, Chevrolet cars still looked graceful, but also increasingly outdated. The little design tweaks here and there could not hide the fact that it was still based on a fresh post-war design that came out in 1949. So essentially the same design for 5 years now, and a big no-no during a time when annual facelifts and short body cycles were the norm. Especially compared to Chevy's arch-rival Ford that introduced a new design in 1952, so 2 years earlier, that were just a bit sharper, a bit boxier, and a bit more modern. Fords also optionally came with V8s, whereas Chevrolet still offered the good old stove-balled 6-cylinder. It was also a neck-and-neck sales race between Ford and Chevy, and although Chevy almost always won, in 1954 Ford came dangerously close in selling more cars. Any way you slice it, Chevy needed something new. So Chevrolet set out to come up with something fresh and new and great for the 1955 model year. And it works like this. I've explained it before in some of my earlier videos, but the American car industry worked with so-called body cycles that lasted about 3 or 4 years or so. This means a design is made for the basic body shell, the bare metal cage, so to speak, that cannot be changed, but plenty of other body parts attached to it can be designed and changed whichever way you wanted it, like the front end and rear end. For Chevrolet, it was decided to adopt a new basic body shell for the 55 and 56 model year, with annual styling refreshes for each individual year. By receiving a new body, Chevrolet used the opportunity to not update their styling, but also the entire car. To a degree, the Chevrolet for 55 was new inside and out. Almost every aspect of the car was given a second thought. Let's start with the very basics. A new frame along with a revised front and rear suspension. Up front you'd find the so-called glide ride suspension system, and in the rear a suspension system inspired by canoes?
Outrigger rear suspension, following the same principle of continuous balance used by the famous outrigger canoe.
Sure, whatever floats your boat, I guess. And all these aspects, so the suspension, the underpinnings, the frame, the transmission, the engine, etc., were given these glorious marketing names, presented as compound words like
Quadrupoise ride, twin guard body, glide ride front suspension,
sweep sight windshield,
comfort zone heating and ventilation, all seasons air conditioner, ball race steering, power touch, power steering, pivot pedal brakes. Yes, the 1955 Chevrolet is literally new from the ground up.
Boy, the marketing department must have had a blast coming up with these names. But the real treat was under the hood. Oh boy, an all-new V8 engine. According to the developers, this engine was a clean sheet design that came pretty much straight from the development department right into the engine bay. No, really, one of the engineers said that he practically dreamed about this engine every night if only he'd be given a green light to actually make it. And in 1955, that light was finally green. The 265 cubic inch or 4.3 liter V8 engine was smaller and lighter than some other V8 engines already developed by GM's engine family, but quickly became a hot rodder's favorite. It's one of those tuner engines, great the way it is, but absolutely open to modifications to make even more power. Not that the standard power output wasn't enough. If you came from an ancient stove-balled 6 with 90 horsepower, then get ready for double the power made by an engine that weighed less. It truly made Chevy the hot one. But let's move on to my favorite subject, the styling. Early styling work started in 1952, as is a common practice for the design department to always work 3 years into the future, so to speak. You can't really take the risk to complete the final design yesterday and ship the cars to the dealers tomorrow. That's not how it works. Here is an early design study from 1953 of what could possibly be the new Chevrolet for 1955. Notice how the car drops the rounded styling of the previous years for a more up-to-date, boxy design, similar to Ford. The pronounced hood is gone for a flatter design, and of course the car comes with the latest wraparound front windshield. Headlights are slightly hooded and placed further apart, accompanied by a wider grille that integrates the round turn signals. Now, before we continue, I can't help but notice how similar this design looks of what would eventually become the 1955 Ford. Put them right next to each other and they almost look like doppelgangers. And then I hear you think that all modern cars these days look the same. Well, guess what? And yet it'd be near impossible for Chevrolet to spy on Ford during the development of the 1955 models, as Ford was just as much under wraps during that time. As my main man Bob would say, these are, after all, happy little accidents. That being said, during the design phase, styling big boss Harley Earl liked to barge into the styling department unannounced every once in a while and either refuse or accept the styling proposals made by fellow stylists. Now, this was let me quickly look. Oh yeah, this was a Tuesday, or refusal day, as he walked in and ordered to change the American grille for a European one. He just came back from Europe and wanted one of those Ferrari grills put onto the car. Why? Because he said so. He was the boss. Deal with it. Alrighty, Ferrari grille it is. And so it happened. A Ferrari-esque grille was put onto the front of the car, flanked by two ovalish turn signals, in a way to make the car appear more sporty and a bit more European. Besides changing the design of the car, other things were explored as well, including a series of new body styles, something of a formal luxury coupe or like a salesman special. Back in the early 50s, some car makers offered a business coupe body style that allowed the front bench seat to be turned into a bed for traveling door-to-door salesmen, but this market niche was on the decline. And so the idea of a car such as this was also scrapped. First of all, because of the lack of the market for this type of car, and second, because the proportions didn't look all too good. What was kept, however, was a sporty-looking two-door station wagon, eventually sold as the Nomad. This isn't exactly a shooting brake, but more like a coupe or sport station wagon with a curvy B-pillar and almost a floating roof thanks to the wraparound rear windshield. The Nomad station wagon was inspired by a Corvette-based station wagon dream car shown a year earlier, and along with the Ferrari grille, also an effort to give Chevrolet a slightly sporty image, bridging the gap between the all-around interest in sportiness, like the Corvette, and the need for family transportation, like the rise of popularity of station wagons.
There's a new era in automobiles. It's the new Motoramic Chevrolet. What's new? Everything. 43 distinctively different interior styling choices. New fabrics, new colors, new treatments. And a whole new design in bodies by Fisher. This new design provides great new strength, rigidity, and roominess. New four-fender visibility with the big new sweep sight windshield and total glass area increased more than 18%. A revolutionary new ride plus new power. The new Chevrolet Turbo Fire V8 engine and two new Blue Flame 6s. It's the new Motoramic Chevrolet.
And so, as is customary in the American car scene, the new Chevrolets for 55 were introduced in the fall of 54. And it was one massive hit. Sales jumped as much as 50% and way past Ford's sales that year. Chevrolet once again claimed the top spot with a comfortable margin, as it should be. And honestly, what's not to like? The end result is one of GM's greatest hits. For a low price, this was one fine automobile. Not mediocre, not adequate, not overly fantastic, but just fine. Even more than fine. A little bit of everything, but nothing too much. Things like the space utilization and packaging, The boxy design proved to be spacious, with an interior that comfortably sat 6 adults and room for another 2 adults in the trunk after midnight. The car was a perfect balance. The overhangs are not too long and not too short. The car is stylish, but not overly dramatic, just perfectly fine. Although the car appears lower and sleeker, it wasn't all that lower, leading to a perfect ride height and great visibility thanks to the sweep side panoramic windshield. And what about the ride? Comfortable, but not overly floaty, just perfectly fine. And what about the engine? Sure, in its earliest months the engine had a few teething problems, but those were fixed in the next year. The V8 made the car quick and peppy, and also had a very respectable fuel consumption for the time. Once again, perfectly fine. A home run. Seeing the new Chevy 455 was a smash hit, of course General Motors wanted to keep the momentum going. And as was customary, the designers couldn't sit still as they had to work on the upcoming facelift for 1956. And so the designers went to work to freshen up the 55 design for 56. Initially, an evolutionary design was chosen by keeping the Ferrari-inspired grille, but reworking the bumper and the headlight treatment. Now, the turn signals are no longer a separate unit, but placed in an oval pod that also houses the headlights. Overall, this gives the car somewhat of a depressed look, or that it just had a bad night with bags under its eyes. And as it turns out, Harley Earl's strong desire to feature a Ferrari grille turned out to be somewhat of a mistake. Chevy dealers complained that it didn't look American enough, and preferred an all-American chromy grille. In fact, extra chrome bumper accessories, as shown right here, were quite popular dealer-installed options, further proving the car might have looked a bit too European. And so that was changed to the design that we now know and love. Turning signals were now visually incorporated in the grille, which was wider and more rectangular and visually stretched to the far sides of the front end, creating a wider look. The rear was also reworked, now with a new taillight design. Gone were the fairly basic taillights of the 55s, now for something of a chromed cutout in the body, graced by a small, round bullet-shaped taillight, creating the illusion of a small tail fin. Of course, the design also includes a party trick. The fuel filler cap is now hidden behind one of the taillights, a typical American styling gimmick of the day. New this year is the addition of a stylish 4-door hardtop. The hardtop body style was already available the year before, only on the 2-door coupe models, but was now extended to the 4-door sedan series. In the meantime, the sales war between the so-called low-price theri, so Chevrolet, Ford and Plymouth, raged on. Sales were slightly lower compared to the year before, but overall sales were down and Chevy still won over the other two with a comfortable margin. For the 1957 model year, something interesting happened. Originally, Chevrolet was only supposed to have a 2-year body cycle, meaning that the 1957 model year would be entirely new. But because of production issues, a last-minute decision was made where Chevrolet would continue to use its existing body shell for another year. So designers had to make another facelift for an aging car body. And to add insult to injury, extending the body cycle with one more year came at the worst of possible moments, as 1957 was also the year Chevy's main competitors came out with fresh new cars. Ford had updated their styling for 1957 with a new body and design, as well as Plymouth. And especially Plymouth took the market by storm with its longer, wider, lower, forward look and impressive fins. And that was the new name of the game. Out were the square boxy cars and in was the longer, wider, lower style. So the Chevy car designers suddenly had to do a crash course trying to make something longer, wider, lower out of something that was boxier than a parcel depot 2 days before Christmas. And they hated every minute of it. No, really, according to the stories, the designers didn't like where the styling was going, but they had to do something. In order to make the car appear longer, wider and lower, plenty of visual tricks were applied, like setting the headlights as far apart as they could, and a revised grille adopting the then popular so-called fish mouth design that you also saw on contemporary Oldsmobiles and Buicks. This put more emphasis on horizontality. Dagma bumpers and V emblems were added to give the Chevy that junior Cadillac look, a recurring theme through the 50s, 60s and 70s. On the back, fins were added to keep up with the styling trends, but also designed to look narrow so that it puts more emphasis on the wideness of the trunk, and so the entire car. It was a rush job and, according to the stories, also plagued with various design flaws. For instance, the two ornaments placed in the hood were cool and all, but if the bolt that kept them in place rusted, it could happen that if you opened the hood, the ornaments would slide down and pierce straight through your front windshield. Also, if one Chevy accidentally bumped into another Chevy on the assembly line, then the front deckma bumpers neatly crashed into the rear taillights of the car in front of it, breaking the glass as the taillights were roughly the same height as the front bumper bullets. But these little nitpicky things aside, the end result is what is often regarded as the most glamorous of the Tri-Five Chevys. And as glamorous as it was, its market performance wasn't so glamorous. Sales were once again lower than the previous year, and even worse, Ford, with its new fresh-looking cars, managed to outsell Chevrolet by about 10% more cars. From here, 1958 rolls around, and finally, Chevrolet receives a new basic body shell and a complete redesign. I won't go too much into the details here, but the 1958s were design boss Harley Earl's wildest and wettest dreams. Earl believed that large fins and light and speedy styling was nonsense, and people would love chrome and bulges. And as a result, the 1958 Chevrolets look entirely different. Longer, wider and lower, but above all, fatter. This proved to be yet another styling mistake, and another design crash course began for the 1959 model year cars. And I have a beautiful video waiting for you there if you want to know more about how that story unfolded. It's also my most popular video, by the way. Go check it out. The Tri-Five Chevys. 55 is the originator, the 57 its dramatic and stylish sister, and the 56 the often forgotten middle child. And although the 55 was an instant hit and the others kinda trudged along, I think we can agree that especially the 57 is the most desired and most iconic of the three. In general, the 1957 Chevrolet is often seen as the American car of the 1950s. The automotive equivalent of the Coke bottle, Elvis, diners, and jukeboxes. See, after the Tri-Fives went out of production and time and the industry moved on, a new cult following emerged. Whereas the average American traded in their cars after a few years or so, and most cars were absolutely lemons after 10 years, the Tri-Five Chevys remained a common sight on American roads far into the 60s and 70s, maybe even the 80s. It became a popular choice as a beater, a used car, or your first car because of its many qualities. Spacious, practical, good handling, peppy, and somewhat fuel efficient. And its engine, the V8, became legendary as the small block Chevy and spawned many different variations and series. And that's where the hobby scene picked it up. The V8 could be endlessly tuned and modified for greater performance, and combined with the lightweight of the car became a popular choice for hobby racing, like derbies, drag racing, and hot rodders. And even if you didn't like the standard V8, then there was enough spare room in the engine bay to drop a big block Chevy V8 in there. And that makes it so interesting, especially the 1957 model year. A car that performed okay in the market segment became an icon, which is odd when you think that Ford sold more cars. But is the 57 Ford also such an iconic car? As soon as most Chevys were used up in racing, those that survived or never really left the home garage became collectible classics in the 1990s and 2000s, with skyrocketing prices. Everyone wanted the holy grail of the Tri-Five Chevys, the 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air Sports Coupe or convertible in red and white, and were willing to pay over 100 to 150 grand for these cars. So much for being an accessible and low-cost transportation option. And even if you didn't have the money, the aftermarket business had you covered. Either original spare parts or reproductions were so plentiful that I'm sure you could practically build your own Tri-Five Chevy from the ground up. So, to circle back, has there ever been a car that is loved by so many, spawned so many different automotive subcultures, and reached such a legendary status? Let me know in the comments. If you want to know more about the design failure of the 1958 Chevrolets and the crash course for the 1959s, click the video in the top left. If you want to know more about turning your Tri-Five Chevy into somewhat of a Cadillac, click the video in the bottom left.